My name is Harper Lane. I am 26 years old. It wasn't a fight. A fight would have been a relief. A loud, messy storm that clears the air. A fight would have meant they saw me as an opponent worthy of engagement, that my feelings were substantial enough to push against. But there was no yelling, no slamming doors, no hot tears of anger. There was just the pristine quiet of my mother's sun-drenched kitchen, and the weight of a single, perfectly polished sentence. It landed not like a punch, but like a slap, wrapped in silk. The initial touch was soft, almost gentle, before the stinging, humiliating impact bloomed deep under the skin. It was the culmination of a lifetime of quiet dismissals. A final, clean cut, severing a thread I hadn't realized was already frayed to breaking. They sat there, my mother and my father, looking like perfect strangers, and delivered the words that would erase me. The day my parents told me to skip my own sister's wedding was not the day they broke my heart. They had been doing that slowly, piece by piece, for my entire life. No, this was the day something inside me finally stopped begging to belong. It was the day I accepted that to them I would always be the inconvenient truth in their beautifully crafted story. And I decided in that sun-drenched, silent kitchen that I was done playing my part before I tell you how everything flipped. Like and subscribe, drop a comment, where are you watching from? To understand why my parents could so easily cut me out of my sister's wedding, you have to understand my sister. Sabrina wasn't just a daughter to them. She was their masterpiece. She was the living, breathing proof that they had done everything right. From the moment she was born, she was destined for a life that would look perfect on a Christmas card. She was the golden one, and I was the shadow she cast. Growing up, our lives were a constant, unspoken competition where the winner had been decided before the race even began. I remember our childhood report cards. Sabrina's would be a perfect row of A's, each one earning a crisp $20 bill from our father and a prime spot on the refrigerator door, held up by a magnet shaped like a smiling sun. Mine were a messy collection of B's, the occasional C in math, and a lone A in art. My report card never made it to the fridge. It was met with a tired sigh from my mother and a quiet, "Well, try harder next time, Harper," before being placed in a drawer, out of sight. It wasn't that they were cruel. It was that they were disinterested. My achievements were small and inconvenient, smudges on the pristine portrait of their perfect family. Sabrina played the piano. She didn't just play, she performed. Our living room was a stage for her recitals, with relatives and neighbors invited to sit in neat rows while she flawlessly executed a Chopin nocturne. The applause would be deafening. I tried piano for a year. My teacher said I had a good ear but clumsy fingers. At my one and only recital, I stumbled through a simple sonata, my face burning with shame. The applause was polite, thin, and full of pity. A few weeks later, my lessons quietly stopped. My parents said it was too expensive to pay for both of us, and Sabrina was the one with real talent. That was the narrative for everything. Sabrina had the talent, the brains, the drive. I had my hobby. My love for photography started with a cheap film camera I bought with my own allowance money when I was 14. While Sabrina was in her room studying for the SATs, her door closed, a fortress of ambition. I was outside, taking pictures of the way the light hit the leaves after it rained, or the lonely expression on our neighbor's garden gnome. My parents saw it as a cute pastime, something to keep me busy while Sabrina was preparing for her real life. They bought her prep course books and paid for private tutors. For my birthday, they got me a photo album. When it came time for college, there was no question that Sabrina would go to a top-tier law school. It had been the plan since she was 10. My father would boast about it at dinner parties. "Sabrina's looking at Georgetown," he'd say, his chest puffed out with pride. When I announced I wanted to go to art school, the room went silent. My father stared at me over his reading glasses. "For what, Harper? To take pictures?" My mother just looked worried. "How will you make a living?" "It's not a stable career, honey. It's a hobby." They didn't see the hours I spent in the darkroom, the chemicals staining my fingertips. They didn't see the joy on my face when I captured the perfect shot. They saw an uncertain path, a deviation from the blueprint they had so carefully designed for Sabrina, and by extension, for the family's reputation. I ended up going to a state school with a decent arts program, paying for most of it myself with scholarships and part-time jobs. My graduation was a small, subdued affair. Sabrina's law school graduation felt like a state dinner. Then came Daniel. If my parents could have designed a fiancé for Sabrina in a lab, it would have been him. He worked in finance, drove a German car, and had a smile that could charm a statue. He talked about stock markets and acquisitions with my father, who would listen with rapt attention, nodding along as if he were hearing the secrets of the universe. Daniel called my mother Catherine and brought her expensive orchids. They adored him. He was the final, perfect piece of Sabrina's perfect life. He was a walking, talking confirmation that they had raised a winner. I met him for the first time at a family dinner a few months after they got engaged. I had just come from a long, grueling wedding shoot and was still tired. I tried to make conversation. "So, Sabrina tells me you're in finance," I said, trying to sound interested. He smiled his polished, white-toothed smile. "I am. Mergers and acquisitions. It's a fast-paced world, but very rewarding." He then turned to my father and continued a conversation about interest rates, leaving me sitting in silence. Later that evening, I overheard my mother talking to Sabrina in the kitchen. "He's just wonderful, sweetie," she whispered. "So driven. He's a perfect match for you." I realized then that Daniel wasn't just marrying Sabrina. He was joining the family project, and I was just a subcontractor, a temporary part of the scenery, easily dismissed when I was no longer needed. My life, in contrast, was anything but a masterpiece. I lived in a small studio apartment above a bakery. The smell of fresh bread woke me up every morning, which was one of the few luxuries I could afford. My studio was my living room, my dark room was my bathroom, and my office was a corner of my kitchen counter. I ran my own photography business, shooting weddings, family portraits, and engagement sessions for people who often paid me in installments. It was a constant hustle. I spent my days chasing clients and my nights editing photos, my eyes burning from the screen's glow, but it was mine. Every client I booked, every invoice I sent, every beautiful photo I delivered, it was all mine. I was proud of what I had built from nothing, with no help from them. They called it my hobby, but it was my life. It was the only place where I felt truly seen, where my vision and my work mattered. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. I was a wedding photographer. I spent nearly every weekend of my life capturing other people's perfect days. I knew the rhythm of a wedding by heart. I knew how to make a nervous bride laugh. I knew how to capture the single tear rolling down a father's cheek as he gave his daughter away. I immortalized the very moments of family unity and love that I had always craved for myself. Just last month, I shot a wedding for a sweet couple, Maria and Ben. They didn't have a lot of money, but their families were so full of joy it was infectious. The bride's sister, the maid of honor, was by her side the entire day, fixing her veil, holding her bouquet, whispering jokes to calm her nerves. During the reception, I framed a shot of the two of them, laughing so hard they were crying. They were huddled together in a corner, their foreheads touching, sharing a moment that was just for them. As I clicked the shutter, a wave of such profound loneliness washed over me that I had to lower my camera and take a deep breath. That was the life I thought sisters had. That was the role I thought I was supposed to play. I was supposed to be the one fixing Sabrina's veil, holding her bouquet, telling her everything was going to be okay. But my family didn't think I was worthy of even attending. I wasn't good enough to stand in the background of their perfect pictures. Sitting there in their silent kitchen after they had delivered their verdict, all of these memories came flooding back. It wasn't just about this one day, this one wedding. It was about a lifetime of being the other daughter, the lesser one, the one whose dreams were disposable. The sentence, "We just think it's better if you're not there," wasn't a new wound. It was just salt in a very, very old one. It was the final confirmation that in the story they were writing for themselves, I was a character they had decided to write out. After the verdict in the kitchen, I went home and fell into a state of numb disbelief. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat on my sofa in the dark, the city lights painting shifting patterns on my wall, and let the silence swallow me. For 2 days, I heard nothing from them. I replayed the conversation in my head, the gentle, devastating tone of my mother's voice, the resolute curve of my father's back. Part of me, the foolish, hopeful part that had survived so much, started to wonder if they'd regret it. Maybe they would call and say it was a mistake, that they had been stressed and hadn't meant it, that hope was a dangerous, flickering candle, and it was about to be extinguished for good. On the third day, my mother called. Her voice was bright and airy, a complete contradiction to the crushing weight of our last conversation. "Harper, honey, it's Mom," she said, as if I wouldn't recognize her number. "Your father and I were thinking, and we'd love for you to come over for dinner tonight. Just the four of us. We really need to talk things through, clear the air." My heart gave a stupid, painful lurch. Clear the air. It sounded like an apology. It sounded like a retreat. Against my better judgment, a tiny seed of relief began to sprout. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe they had come to their senses. "Okay," I said, my voice quiet. "Yeah, okay. I can be there around 7? Wonderful, darling. We'll see you then." She hung up before I could ask any more questions. The entire drive to their house, I rehearsed what I would say. I would be calm. I would be rational. I would explain how much it would hurt to be excluded. I would talk about what being a family meant. I wouldn't cry or yell. I would be the reasonable adult they always claimed they wanted me to be. I walked up to the front door holding on to that fragile hope, ready to build a bridge back to them. But it wasn't a bridge they were offering. It was an ambush. When I walked in, they were all in the formal living room, a space reserved for important holidays and guests they wanted to impress. It was a cold, impersonal room, decorated in shades of beige and gold, with furniture no one ever seemed to sit on. And sitting in the center of it all, perched on a cream-colored armchair, was Sabrina. She was the picture of bridal perfection. She wore a crisp white blouse, tailored trousers, and her hair was pulled back in a sleek, elegant bun. In her hand, she held a large glass of white wine, which she sipped with the cool, detached air of someone at a press conference, bored by the reporter's questions. My parents were on the sofa opposite her. My father was fiddling with his tie, and my mother had that same tight, practiced smile she'd worn in the kitchen. They called it a family meeting, but it felt like a corporate tribunal, and I was the employee being fired. The hope I'd walked in with curdled in my stomach. This wasn't about clearing the air. This was about managing the fallout. This was about reinforcing the original decision. "Harper, thank you for coming," my mother began, her voice taking on a careful, rehearsed tone. She gestured to the empty chair facing them all. "The hot seat." I sat down, my hands clenched in my lap. The silence was heavy, judgmental. My mother exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance with my father. It was a signal. "Time to start the performance. Harper," she said, leaning forward, her hands clasped together. "You know how much we love you." "We all do." She glanced at Sabrina, who gave a small, non-committal nod before taking another sip of her wine. "But Sabrina's wedding is very important. It's a huge event. A lot of people will be there. Daniel's colleagues, his family's friends. We just don't want any distractions." There it was again. That word, distractions. Hearing it for the second time, in front of my sister, was a new level of humiliation. It was as if they were discussing a problematic floral arrangement or a catering issue. They were talking about me as if I wasn't even in the room, a variable that needed to be controlled. A surge of cold anger cut through my numbness. I looked past my mother, past my silent father, and directly at my sister. She met my gaze with a look of mild irritation, as if I were a stain on her new blouse. "I'm your daughter," I said, my voice quiet but shaking with a force that surprised me. "I'm your sister. I'm not a PR crisis." The room fell silent again. My mother looked flustered, her script momentarily forgotten. My father cleared his throat and stared at a spot on the carpet. For a moment, I thought I might have gotten through. Then Sabrina spoke. She set her wine glass down on the polished wooden table beside her, the clink of glass on wood echoing in the quiet room. It was a sharp, deliberate sound, drawing all the attention. "It's just one day, Harper," she said, her voice smooth and laced with condescension. "Don't make this about you." And there it was, the dagger dipped in honey. With that one sentence, she dismissed my pain, my history, my very existence in our family, and reframed it all as a childish bid for attention. She painted me as the selfish one, the drama queen trying to ruin her perfect moment. It was a tactic she had perfected over the years, and as always, my parents let her do it. My throat felt tight. "Make this about me?" I whispered, incredulous. "Sabrina, my entire life has been about making sure nothing gets in the way of your moments. When you were studying for the bar, I was the one who walked the dog and ran errands so you could focus. When you had your first big case, I canceled my own plans to be in the courtroom to support you. All I am asking for is to be in a back row pew while you get married. How is that making it about me?" Sabrina just shook her head, a small, pitying smile on her lips. "You're being dramatic. You know, Daniel's family is very traditional. It's just easier this way. Easier." The word hung in the air, a testament to their true priority, convenience. My feelings were an inconvenience. My presence was an inconvenience. My very existence was an inconvenience. My father, who had been silent the entire time, finally decided to step in and end the discussion. He saw his role as the closer, the one who finalized the unpleasant business decision. He leaned forward, adopting a practical, no-nonsense tone. "We've thought about the logistics," he said, as if discussing a business merger. "We'll just tell people you couldn't get time off work. With your photography business, it's a believable excuse. It'll be easier for everyone." And that was it, the final crushing blow. They had already worked out the cover story. They had a plan to erase me from the day, a neat little lie to smooth over my absence. They weren't just asking me not to come. They were actively plotting how to pretend I didn't exist. I looked at the three of them, my mother with her pained yet resolute expression, my father with his pragmatic coldness, my sister with her triumphant, indifferent gaze. They were a perfect united front, a team, and I was not on it. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. There was nothing left to say. There were no magic words that could make them see me, no argument that could penetrate their fortress of self-interest. They had made their decision. They had planned my disappearance. Okay, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I understand. I turned and walked out of the living room, down the hall, and out the front door, without looking back. As the door clicked shut behind me, I felt a profound and terrifying sense of finality. It was easier for them to pretend I didn't exist. And in that moment, I realized that I was finally ready to grant their wish. The 2 days that followed the family meeting were a masterclass in emotional survival. I operated on autopilot, moving through my life with a profound sense of detachment. I woke up, I made coffee, I sat at my computer and edited photos of smiling, happy families. I saw a mother adjusting her son's bow tie, a father wiping a tear from his eye as he looked at his daughter, two sisters laughing together in a field of wildflowers. I clicked and sharpened, adjusted the color and contrast, making these perfect moments even more perfect, all while feeling like a ghost in my own skin. A part of me had shut down, a defense mechanism against a pain so deep it felt bottomless. I avoided my phone. I silenced my email notifications. I didn't want to see their names or hear their voices. I just wanted to float in the gray, silent space I had created for myself. But the real world, and my family's carefully constructed version of it, does not allow for such vacuums. It came on a Tuesday night. I was eating a bowl of cereal for dinner, staring blankly at the wall, when my laptop pinged. It was an email. The sender was my father. The subject line, in his usual cheerful declarative style, read, "Lane Family News, Wedding Countdown." My father's family updates were a long-standing tradition. Every few months, he would compose a mass email to our entire extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins scattered across the country, summarizing our lives into neat, palatable bullet points. It was his way of maintaining the family narrative, of making sure everyone had the approved version of our story. I usually skimmed them. They were always full of praise for Sabrina's latest achievement and a brief, vague mention of me that made my life sound like a pleasant, inconsequential pastime. I knew opening this one would be a bad idea. I knew it would be like willingly touching a hot stove, but I did it anyway. Some part of me needed to see the lie in print. The email was long, written in my dad's overly enthusiastic prose. It was a monument to their perfect family, and Sabrina was the statue on top. "Hello, wonderful family," it began. "We hope this email finds you well. Things are wonderfully hectic here as we enter the final stretch before Sabrina and Daniel's big day. We are just buzzing with excitement." He went on to describe Sabrina's recent bridal shower in excruciating detail. Catherine and the bridesmaids threw a stunning party for our girl. The theme was A Taste of Tuscany, and it was simply divine. Sabrina was showered with so much love, and some very lovely kitchen gadgets. She was positively glowing. Next was a paragraph dedicated to Daniel. "And we couldn't be prouder of our future son-in-law. Daniel just received a big promotion at his firm and will now be vice president of his division. The boy's a real go-getter. We are so thrilled to have him officially joining the Lane family." Then came the wedding details. A laundry list of expensive, impressive vendors, the French-inspired menu from the caterer, the 9-piece band they'd hired for the reception, the breathtaking views at the historic estate they'd booked. It was all there, laid out for everyone to admire. A testament to their success, their taste, their perfect daughter's perfect life. I scrolled and scrolled, my stomach twisting into a tighter and tighter knot. I knew it was coming. My mention, the small obligatory footnote at the bottom of the grand announcement. And then I saw it. Tucked away at the very end of a long, glowing paragraph about the wedding plans was a single, dismissive line. "Harper's been very busy with her photography hobby, but sends her love." I read it once, then twice. My eyes locked on one word, hobby. It was a small word. 6 letters, innocuous to anyone else. But to me it was a lit match dropped on a trail of gasoline. It was the single most insulting, invalidating word he could have possibly chosen. It wasn't a business. It wasn't a career. It wasn't the thing that I poured my entire soul into, the thing that paid my rent and fed my body and gave my life meaning. It was a hobby, like collecting stamps or knitting scarves. A cute little thing I did to pass the time. Years of sweat, sacrifice, and survival, all reduced to a hobby. I thought of the 16-hour days spent on my feet, my back aching, hauling heavy equipment from one location to another. I thought of the terror of the first of the month, praying I had made enough to cover my bills. I thought of the clients who had cried with joy when they saw my photos, telling me I had captured the most important moments of their lives. I thought of the nights I had stayed up until dawn, editing until my vision blurred, all to build something that was mine, something real. And my own father, in a message to our entire family, had dismissed it all with a single careless word. To him, my life's work was nothing more than a convenient excuse for my absence at the wedding. He hadn't just created a lie, he had used my own life to build it, twisting my passion into a prop for their family drama. And the second part of the sentence was somehow even worse. But sends her love. They were putting words in my mouth. They were fabricating my compliance, painting a picture of me as the supportive, loving daughter, happily toiling away at my little hobby, cheering them on from afar. They weren't just erasing me. They were replacing me with a smiling, agreeable ghost who would cause them no trouble. I slammed my laptop shut. My hands were shaking. The cereal sat untouched, the milk turning the flakes to mush. The numbness that had protected me for the past 2 days was gone, replaced by a white-hot, clarifying rage. That night, I did something else I knew I shouldn't. I opened my laptop again and went to my sister's social media page. Her profile was a curated gallery of her perfect life. The header image was a professional engagement photo of her and Daniel, standing in a vineyard, laughing artfully at something out of frame. Her feed was flooded with wedding-related content. I scrolled through the photos, each one a fresh stab. There was Sabrina holding up her hand to show off her diamond ring, her nails perfectly manicured. There was Sabrina and Daniel, clinking champagne glasses at an expensive restaurant. There was Sabrina with our mother, both of them smiling as they looked at wedding dresses. The captions were a masterclass in public relations. She used words like family, joy, unity, blessed. The comments from friends and relatives poured in beneath each picture. So much love in one photo. You two are perfect. What a beautiful family. I was reading a fairy tale, a complete work of fiction, and everyone I knew was applauding the authors. They were celebrating a family, a unity, a joy that I knew for a fact was a lie. These words, which should have been warm and comforting, now felt like lies carved into marble, cold, permanent, and utterly false. I was looking at a digital world that mirrored my father's email, a world where everyone was happy, everything was perfect, and I simply didn't exist. That email wasn't just an update. It was a public declaration. It was the last straw. The pain of being uninvited was one thing, but the cold, calculated act of replacing my reality with their fiction was another. They had not only pushed me out, but they had also meticulously plastered over the hole where I used to be. Staring at the glowing screen, at the smiling faces and the loving comments, I felt a profound and final shift inside me. The part of me that had always hoped for their approval, that had craved their acceptance, finally withered and died. They had reduced my life to a hobby. They had turned my existence into a lie. They had shown me, in no uncertain terms, that their story was more important than their daughter. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I could no longer be a character in it. In the aftermath of my father's email, the white-hot rage that had seared through me didn't curdle into tears or explode into a confrontation. It simply cooled. It solidified into something hard, heavy, and clear inside my chest. It was the calm that comes after a devastating storm, when the wind dies down and you can finally see the wreckage for what it is. The battle was over. I had lost, and in that loss I found a strange, quiet freedom. I didn't scream. I didn't call my parents to rage at them for the cruelty of that one little word, hobby. I didn't send a blistering, wounded reply to my father's email. Didn't beg my sister to see reason. Didn't fight. Every impulse to plead for my place in their family, an instinct that had governed my entire life, simply vanished. It was as if a switch had been flipped in the core of my being, turning off the part of me that craved their validation. The silence that followed was not one of weakness, but of profound and chilling certainty. I was done. While they moved through their final days of wedding preparations, absorbed in a world of seating charts and champagne toasts, I began a different kind of preparation. While they were finalizing flower arrangements, debating the merits of peonies versus garden roses, I was finalizing something else entirely, an offer that had been sitting in my inbox for 3 weeks, a silent, waiting escape hatch I had been too afraid to take. About a month earlier, I had received an email from a woman named Eleanor Vance, the creative director for the Pine Ridge Collection, a chain of luxury boutique hotels in the Pacific Northwest. She had seen my portfolio online, a feature on a small but respected wedding blog, and was impressed with what she called my emotional authenticity. They were looking for a full-time in-house brand photographer to create a new visual identity for their properties. The job was based in Portland, Oregon. It was a career-defining opportunity. It offered a stable salary that was more than I'd ever made in a single year, full benefits, a relocation package, and most importantly, creative freedom. It was the kind of validation I had dreamed of, a professional acknowledgement that my work was not just a hobby, but an art. And yet, I hadn't accepted it. I had done 2 video interviews with them, and they had formally offered me the position, sending over the contract a week later. But I had stalled. I told Eleanor I needed time to think, that it was a big move, and I had to consider my existing clients. But that was a lie. The real reason I hesitated was a small, pathetic, and deeply ingrained one. I didn't want to be that far away from my family. A part of me, the part that still believed in fairy tales, thought that if I stayed close, if I kept trying, eventually they would see me. I was afraid that moving 2,000 miles away would be the final, irreversible act of giving up on them. Now, sitting in the blue glow of my laptop screen, that fear felt laughably naive. Giving up on them? They had given up on me long ago. They had made it clear that my proximity was an inconvenience they were actively trying to solve. The tether I had been so afraid of breaking wasn't holding me to a family. It was chaining me to a source of pain. That night, after reading my father's email, I opened my inbox and found the offer letter from Eleanor. The subject line read, "Following up, brand photographer position at the Pine Ridge Collection." It had been sitting there, unread for 5 days, a silent testament to my own indecision. I opened it. The contract was attached, a clean, professional PDF. All my fears about leaving, about being alone, evaporated. They were replaced by the simple, stark reality of the situation. There was nothing left for me here. The juxtaposition of their world and mine over the next few hours was stark. I imagined my mother on the phone with the caterer, confirming the final headcount. At the same time, I was on a rental website, looking at 1-bedroom apartments in Portland's Pearl District, a neighborhood I'd only ever seen in pictures. I pictured Sabrina and Daniel at a dance studio, practicing their choreographed first dance, laughing as he spun her around. At the same time, I was creating a spreadsheet, calculating my moving costs and budgeting for the trip. They were absorbed in the fantasy of a single perfect day. I was methodically planning the rest of my life. At 1:30 in the morning, my apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I downloaded the contract to my desktop. I read through it one more time, but I already knew what it said. It was a new beginning, spelled out in corporate legal language. I clicked the box to affix my digital signature, a neat cursive Harper Lane that looked far more confident than I felt. I attached it to a new email addressed to Eleanor Vance. The subject was simple, offer accepted. In the body, I wrote, "Dear Eleanor, please find my signed contract attached. I am thrilled to accept the position and look forward to joining the team in Portland. Sincerely, Harper." My finger hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. This was the quietest, most significant act of rebellion of my life. I wasn't just RSVPing no to a wedding. I was setting my old life on fire and walking away without looking back. I closed my eyes and clicked. A wave of something I couldn't quite name washed over me. It wasn't happiness or excitement. It was a terrifying, exhilarating calm. It was the feeling of letting go of a rope you've been gripping for so long your hands are raw and bleeding. The pain is immense, but so is the relief. I stood up from my computer and walked into the middle of my small studio apartment. The space suddenly felt temporary, like a hotel room I was about to check out of. I looked at my things. The worn armchair, the overflowing bookshelf, the prints of my favorite photos tacked to the wall. It was the life I had built in their shadow, and it was time to see what I could build in the sun. I didn't go to bed. Instead, I pulled out an empty cardboard box from my closet. The decision was made. The action had to follow. I just packed. I started methodically, clinically, not with the sentimental items, but with the tools of my trade, the very hobby they'd used to write me off. I carefully wrapped each of my camera lenses and placed them in their padded case. I consolidated files onto external hard drives, my entire professional life condensed into a few small black rectangles. I packed my lighting equipment, my tripods, my business records. This was what mattered. This was what was coming with me. I wasn't just skipping my sister's wedding. That was a small, petty act of defiance. This was bigger. This was a seismic shift. I was leaving the city I grew up in. I was leaving the clients I had cultivated. I was leaving the ghost of the daughter I had tried so hard to be. I was leaving everything, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back to see if they were watching. The final days in my apartment were a blur of cardboard and packing tape. My life was being systematically deconstructed, sorted, and sealed away into uniform brown boxes. My bookshelves were empty, the spines of my favorite novels now hidden from view. The walls were bare with pale, ghostly rectangles where my photographs used to hang. Most of the furniture was already gone, sold to strangers on the internet, or donated to a local charity. The space echoed with every footstep, the floors creaking under the weight of my departure. I was a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life, and I had never felt more solid. I worked with a relentless, mechanical focus. Each packed box was a small victory, a tangible step toward my new life. Each item sold was a thread cut, a tie to the past severed. I was dismantling the life of the girl who waited by the phone, the girl who craved their approval, and in its place, a new woman was emerging, one who was methodical, clear-eyed, and utterly on her own. It was 3 days before the wedding. According to the meticulous timeline Sabrina had emailed out months ago, today was the day the out-of-town guests would begin to arrive. The rehearsal dinner was tomorrow. I pictured the flurry of activity at my parents' house, the forced smiles, the superficial pleasantries, the carefully orchestrated performance of a happy, welcoming family. Here, in my echoing apartment, there was only the sound of tape being ripped from a roll and the scrape of a box being pushed across the floor. Then, a sound that didn't belong. The sharp, intrusive buzz of the doorbell. I froze, my hand hovering over a stack of old coffee table books. I wasn't expecting anyone. My landlord knew I was moving, and any friends I might have told were given strict instructions not to visit, to give me space. For a wild second, I thought it might be them. My mother or father standing on my doorstep for a last-minute, tearful appeal. My heart hammered against my ribs, a traitorous, hopeful beat. I quickly silenced it. That was the old Harper. That was the girl I was packing away. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. It wasn't my parents. It was a courier, a young man in a uniform, looking impatient as he held a medium-sized box. I opened the door a crack. "Package for Harper Lane," he said, not looking up from his tablet. I signed his screen with a scribble, and he handed me the box before turning and jogging back down the stairs. I closed the door, the lock clicking shut with a heavy finality. I looked down at the box in my hands. It was a generic gift basket, the kind you'd see in a grocery store aisle, wrapped in crinkly cellophane and tied at the top with a cheerful purple ribbon. My parents' address was on the shipping label. It was from them. My first impulse was to throw it away, unopened, but a colder, more curious part of me took over. I wanted to see the exact shape and texture of their guilt. I wanted to know what kind of cheap, impersonal gesture they thought would be enough to smooth over the chasm they had created between us. I set the box on the floor, my last remaining piece of furniture being a single folding chair. I sat down and, with the detached precision of a scientist examining a specimen, I untied the ribbon and tore away the cellophane. The contents were nestled in a bed of shredded paper. It was a textbook, low-effort peace offering. First, there was a lavender-scented candle in a glass jar. The label promised calm and tranquility. It was a cloying, artificial scent, the kind that gives you a headache. I knew exactly what it was meant to communicate. You are being hysterical. You need to calm down. It wasn't a comfort. It was a command disguised as a gift. Next to it was a small bottle of cheap wine, a Pinot Grigio with a generic, forgettable label. This was not the vintage champagne that would be flowing freely at the reception. This was not the expensive Bordeaux my father would be serving at the rehearsal dinner. This was a $10 bottle of wine, a gesture that required absolutely no thought and even less expense. It was an offering that cost them nothing. And finally, tucked into the paper shreds, was a small cream-colored envelope. The card inside was thick and embossed with a bland watercolor painting of flowers. Their handwriting was on the inside, my mother's looping, perfect script, with my father's blocky, simple signature underneath. The message was short, 5 sentences, each one a masterwork of condescension. Thinking of you. The lie was so bald it almost made me laugh. They weren't thinking of me. They were thinking of themselves. This entire basket was for them. It was a way for them to perform the act of caring, to check a box and tell themselves they had done the right thing, that they had reached out to their difficult, emotional daughter. It was an act of absolution for the low price of $25, plus shipping. We know this is hard. This was perhaps the cruelest line of all. It was a shallow, patronizing acknowledgement of my pain without a shred of responsibility for causing it. It was the verbal equivalent of a pat on the head. There, there. It framed my suffering as an unavoidable side effect of their grander, more important plans. My heart, broken and bleeding, was just an unfortunate but necessary bit of collateral damage. But it's for the best. There it was again. The ultimate gaslighting statement. They were the arbiters of reality, and in their reality, my total erasure from a milestone family event was a net positive. It was for the best. For who? For Sabrina's stress levels. For Daniel's family's comfort. For my parents' public image. For everyone except me. They weren't just telling me to accept my pain. They were telling me my pain was a necessary component of their happiness. Don't worry, we'll save you a piece of cake. The crumbs from the feast. The leftovers from the celebration I was not fit to attend. This was the line that truly revealed how they saw me. They pictured me sitting alone in my apartment, devastated, pining away for any small connection to the party, any little taste of the joy I was being denied. They thought a promise of leftover cake would be a comfort, a sweet little consolation prize for my good behavior. It was a gesture of such profound, insulting pity that it took my breath away. I read the card one last time, the 5 sentences of their perfectly crafted, self-serving narrative. They saw a heartbroken girl, weeping in her lonely apartment, waiting for a scrap of affection. They saw the convenient, tragic character they had written for me. My gaze drifted from the card to the stacks of boxes that filled my living room. Boxes labeled Studio Gear, Oregon, and New Life. My signed employment contract and apartment lease sat on the kitchen counter, neatly filed in a folder. My car was already packed with the essentials for my cross-country drive. I stood up, holding the gift basket in my hands, the candle, the wine, the card, the pathetic shreds of paper. I walked to the large industrial-sized trash can I had rented for my move-out. I didn't salvage the wine. I didn't pause to consider keeping the candle. I dropped the entire box in the trash. Even the card? It landed with a dull, unsatisfying thud at the bottom of the empty bin. They were so certain, so completely, utterly certain that I was sitting at home, crying, waiting for crumbs. They had sent me this basket to manage my sadness, to quiet my predictable feminine emotions. They had sent it to a version of me that no longer existed. They had no idea. No idea of the contract, the apartment, the boxes, the plan. They had no idea that I wasn't just absenting myself from a wedding. I was executing an escape. They had no idea I was already gone. The morning of Sabrina's wedding, I woke before dawn. My body was stiff from sleeping on a yoga mat in the middle of my empty living room, the last of my possessions to go. The air was cold, the silence of the apartment absolute. Outside, the sky was a bruised pre-dawn purple. This was it. The day of the grand performance. The day my family would officially present their perfect, curated masterpiece to the world. And it was also the day of my exodus. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel regret. The emotions of the past few weeks had been burned away, leaving behind a stark, clean slate. All that remained was a sense of purpose, a quiet hum of energy that propelled me through my final actions in that apartment. I showered in the cold bathroom, the water echoing loudly against the bare tile. I dressed in practical, comfortable clothes for the long drive, jeans, a soft t-shirt, and sturdy boots. I made a final sweep of the empty rooms, my footsteps loud on the wooden floors. There was nothing left of me here, just a few dust bunnies and the faint scent of lavender from the trash can. I dropped the keys on the kitchen counter as instructed by my landlord, took one last look at the 4 walls that had housed so much of my quiet struggle, and walked out without looking back. Downstairs, my car was waiting. A loyal steel companion packed to the gills. The back seat and trunk were a chaotic but organized jigsaw puzzle of boxes and bags. Everything I owned condensed into a single mobile unit. As I slid into the driver's seat, the first rays of sun were beginning to slice through the city skyline. It was 6 a.m. In a few hours, my mother would be fussing over Sabrina's hair, and my father would be making sure his suit was perfectly pressed. They were beginning their day of grand illusions. I was beginning my new reality. I turned the key and the engine rumbled to life. I pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the street, the building, the entire neighborhood that had been the backdrop to my old life. Driving through the sleeping city, the streets were empty, and I felt a sense of anonymous freedom. I was just another car on the road, another person heading somewhere else. An hour into the drive, as the city receded in my rearview mirror and the landscape opened up into sprawling highways, my phone began to buzz. It was a persistent, irritating vibration against the passenger seat. I glanced at it. The screen was lighting up with a barrage of notifications from a group chat I had long ago muted. Lane Family Fun. My cousin Sarah had posted the first photo of the day. It was a selfie of her and my Aunt Carol. their faces aglow with professional makeup, hair already perfectly coiffed. The caption read, "Wedding Day Glam. So excited to celebrate Sabrina and Daniel? Lane wedding." The photos kept coming, a relentless stream of filtered, performative joy. There was a shot of the groomsmen, including my father, all wearing matching tuxedos and forced, jovial smiles. There was a close-up of the bridal bouquet, a cascade of white orchids and roses, impossibly perfect. There were pictures of champagne glasses, of the church entrance, of guests in their finest clothes. Each image was a dispatch from a foreign planet, a world I no longer orbited. I didn't feel a pang of longing. I felt a profound, clarifying detachment. I was watching them play their parts, and for the first time I could see the strings. I saw the strained smiles, the carefully chosen angles, the desperate need for everything to look perfect. I had spent years behind the camera, capturing these moments for other families, and I knew the difference between genuine emotion and a pose. What I was seeing on my phone was a masterfully produced stage play. I drove on, the miles accumulating on my odometer. I passed through small towns and wide-open fields, the scenery shifting from the familiar concrete of home to the rolling hills and dense forests of a new territory. The hum of the tires on the asphalt was a steady, meditative rhythm. It was the sound of escape. Around noon, I pulled into a roadside rest stop in the middle of nowhere. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. I bought a lukewarm coffee and a stale pastry from a vending machine, my wedding feast. I sat on a wooden picnic table, the peeling paint rough under my fingertips, and looked at my phone again. The family group chat was now flooded with pictures of the guests arriving at the church. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was beautiful. Everyone was playing their part. I scrolled through the images, my thumb moving mechanically over the screen. Then I stopped. I opened my contacts list. I found my mother's name, Mom. For a long moment, I just stared at it. For 26 years, that contact had represented a complex mix of love, duty, hope, and constant, unending disappointment. With a steady finger, I pressed delete contact. A confirmation popped up. Are you sure? I was. I deleted my father's number next, then Sabrina's. One by one, I erased the digital tethers that connected me to them. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of housekeeping. A clearing of space. I logged into my social media accounts and one by one, I unfollowed them all. The aunts, the uncles, the cousins, the whole cast of characters in the family play. I watched their smiling faces disappear from my feed, replaced by the work of other photographers, artists, and travelers I admired. I was curating my own world now, choosing what and who I allowed into my line of sight. I got back in my car and kept driving. The landscape grew wilder, the mountains in the distance becoming larger and more majestic. I was moving west, chasing the afternoon sun. At precisely 2 p.m., according to Sabrina's schedule, the ceremony was beginning. As the organist in that grand, historic church played the opening notes of the bridal march, I was crossing the Oregon state line. A large green sign welcomed me. Welcome to Oregon. I felt a smile spread across my face. A real one, not for a camera. While Sabrina walked down the aisle on my father's arm, a vision in white, a symbol of their family's success, I was navigating the winding roads of a new state, my car filled with the humble, tangible evidence of my own life, while she stood at the altar and said, "I do," committing herself to a shared future with Daniel. I was driving past towering pine trees and open sky, silently recommitting to myself. I thought about the role I was supposed to have played today. I would have been in the background, smiling on cue, making sure my dress wasn't wrinkled, a silent, supporting actress in the blockbuster production of Sabrina's life. I would have been watching her dream come true. Instead, I was here, in my own frame, the main character of my own story. I arrived in Portland as the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden, hazy light over the city. I found my new apartment building, a modest but clean brick structure in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. After picking up the keys from the lockbox, I let myself into my new home. The apartment was empty. Completely, totally empty. The walls were a clean, neutral white. The late afternoon light streamed through the large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It smelled of fresh paint and possibility. There was no furniture, no history, no ghosts. It was a blank canvas. My blank canvas. I walked to the window. It overlooked a small park, a stretch of green grass and pine trees. I could see people walking their dogs, a couple sitting on a bench, a group of kids kicking a soccer ball. It was a scene of quiet, everyday life. For once, I wasn't behind a camera, trying to capture someone else's perfect moment. I wasn't on the outside, looking in. I was here, in my own space, In my own life. I was finally, completely, in my own frame. I took a deep, steadying breath. It tasted like freedom. Their messages were laced with a confused, gossipy urgency. To them, this was just another piece of family drama, a shocking twist in the evening's entertainment. They didn't see the years of pain that led to this moment. They only saw the explosion. Then came the texts from the older generation, the aunts and uncles who had always seen me as the quiet, slightly odd one. Their messages were not confused. They were judgmental. From Aunt Carol. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you have ruined your sister's wedding day. Your mother is in tears. You should be ashamed of yourself, Harper. Shame. It was the weapon they had always used to keep me in line. A sense of it flickered in my chest, a ghost of an old reflex, but it wouldn't catch. There was no fuel left for that fire. I was not ashamed. I was free. Finally, the messages from my mother started. They were a masterclass in emotional escalation. The first was a demand. Harper Lane, you pick up this phone right now and call me. The second was a denial. Your father must have misunderstood you. What is this nonsense about movers? Where are you? The third was pure rage. How could you be so selfish? After everything we have done for you, you choose today of all days to pull a stunt like this? You have humiliated this family and you have broken your sister's heart. And the last one, the inevitable final play from her well-worn book, was manipulative pity. Harper, please. I'm starting to get worried. Just let us know you are safe. We love you so much, honey. Please just call. I read them all, one by one, with a strange clinical detachment. I felt like a sociologist studying the predictable behavior of a tribe I no longer belonged to. Their reactions were a perfect reflection of their character. Their concern wasn't for me, for my happiness or my well-being. Their panic was entirely self-serving. I hadn't just moved. I had blown a hole in their carefully constructed narrative. I had taken away their control. The quiet daughter, the family scapegoat, had walked off stage in the middle of their biggest performance, and they had no idea how to finish the show without her. I thought about them at that reception, a party that was supposed to be the crowning achievement of their lives as parents. Now the air would be thick with whispers. The guests would be stealing glances at my parents' strained faces, at Sabrina's frozen smile. The joyful celebration had been contaminated by an inconvenient reality. They had finally realized it. Their quiet daughter wasn't just skipping the wedding. She wasn't sitting at home crying over a slice of leftover cake. She was gone from their family photos. I pictured the photographer trying to assemble everyone for the big family portrait. He would be trying to arrange them, my parents, Sabrina and her new husband, and there would be a space, an awkward, unfillable gap where I was supposed to be standing. For years, I had been physically present but emotionally absent. Now, my physical absence was a more powerful statement than my presence ever could have been. I was the ghost at their feast, and my silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Gone from their narrative. The simple, easy lie they had prepared, Harper's busy with her hobby, was now useless. The truth I had given my father would spread through the room, morphing and twisting with each retelling, but the core of it was undeniable. I had left. They had lost control of the story. They could no longer define me to the world, because I had defined myself, far away from their influence, gone from the pedestal where they'd placed Sabrina, and built their lives around her glow. For so long, their family dynamic had been a simple one. Sabrina was the sun, the brilliant, flawless center of their universe. I was the distant, shadowy moon, a necessary contrast to make her light seem even brighter. Her successes were measured against my perceived failures. Her easy golden path was made possible by my quiet, accommodating nature. But a sun without anything to cast a shadow on is just a harsh, glaring light. By removing myself from the equation, I had destabilized their entire world. My absence had created a vacuum, and into that vacuum would rush all the things my presence had helped to suppress. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it had to be. I will never forgive you for this, Sabrina. The final, predictable curse. I looked at her message, at the culmination of a lifetime of being second best, and I felt nothing but a quiet, profound pity for her. Her perfect day had been tarnished, not by me, but by the rotten foundation her own family was built on. She could blame me forever, but it wouldn't change the truth. I had seen enough. I had witnessed the fallout. I had confirmed that my decision, as drastic as it was, had been the only one I could possibly make. With a final steady motion, I picked up my phone. I pressed and held the power button and watched as the screen went black. I did not put it on silent. I turned it off completely. severing the last digital cord connecting me to that life. The storm of their anger and confusion could rage on for as long as it wanted, thousands of miles away. It could no longer touch me. I was out of the rain. I stood up, walked over to my car, and opened the back door. I pulled out the first box I could reach. It was labeled books. I carried it inside, the weight of it familiar and comforting in my arms. I set it down in the middle of the living room, in a patch of moonlight that now pooled on the floor. I knelt down, broke the seal of the tape, and began to unpack. 6 months passed. 6 months of quiet, steady, world-building work. My life in Oregon took on a rhythm that was entirely my own. I learned the names of the baristas at the coffee shop down the street. I found a favorite hiking trail where the pine trees smelled so strong it felt like you were breathing in the earth itself. I made friends, tentative at first, then real. Other artists, a chef, a bookstore owner. They knew nothing of the girl I used to be. They only knew the woman I was becoming. The photographer who was quiet but confident, who loved the moody Oregon light, and whose work was starting to get noticed. My career didn't just stabilize, it exploded. The Pine Ridge collection gave me the kind of creative freedom I had only ever dreamed of. They didn't want generic, smiling couple photos. They wanted art. They wanted the soul of their hotels captured in images, and they trusted me to do it. My work was featured on the cover of their national travel magazine. That led to a feature in Modern Lens, a prestigious photography journal that had been a Bible to me in art school. They ran a 10-page spread of my hotel series, calling it a masterful study in light and loneliness. The hotel chain flew me to Italy for 2 weeks to shoot their new property on Lake Como. I spent my days on a boat, capturing the way the alpine light struck the water, and my evenings eating pasta and drinking wine at small, family-owned trattorias. It was a world away from shooting frantic, stressful weddings for clients on a shoestring budget. It was a world away from the constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my old life. Every day, I woke up to the quiet hum of a life that was finally, completely, mine. I hadn't heard a single word from my family since that final explosive night. I had a new phone number, and my social media was locked down and curated. For all intents and purposes, to them, I had vanished. The anger and the pain had faded, leaving behind not a scar, but a smooth, clean space where the wound used to be. I rarely thought of them. Then one evening I came home to find a letter in my mailbox. It had been forwarded from my old address, a service I had set up for bills and junk mail. The envelope was a familiar cream color. The handwriting was my mother's. My heart gave a single small flutter, a muscle memory of an old fear. But it was gone as quickly as it came. I didn't feel dread. I felt a detached curiosity. I took the letter inside, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at my small kitchen table. I slit the envelope open with a butter knife. The letter inside was short. "Harper," it began. "We didn't realize how far we'd pushed you away. Things have been quiet since you left. Sabrina says the pictures don't feel right without you in them. The family portrait from the wedding is sitting in a box. She says there's a hole where you should be. We hope you are well, Mom." I read the letter twice. The Harper of 6 months ago would have cried. She would have seen the words, "we didn't realize," as an excuse. And Sabrina says, as yet another example of her feelings being filtered through her sister. She would have raged at the fact that it wasn't an apology, but a complaint. They weren't sad because I was hurt. They were sad because their family portrait was ruined. My absence had created an aesthetic problem, a blemish on their memory of the perfect day. But I was not the Harper of 6 months ago. I folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. I walked into my spare room, which I had converted into a small office and studio. I opened a drawer in my desk, a drawer where I kept important documents, my passport, my business license, extra memory cards for my cameras. I placed the letter in the drawer, right beside a box of my favorite camera lenses. It was an artifact from a past life, a fossil from a distant era. It had no power here. It was just a piece of paper. They thought I was missing from their photos, a blank space that ruined the composition. They thought the problem was the empty spot in the frame, but they were wrong. My absence hadn't created a hole in the picture. It had simply revealed what the picture was really of all along. Not a family, but a performance. Not unity, but a carefully arranged lie. Without the shadow, the blinding light of the sun was just a glare. Final line, they told me not to come because it was her day. So I left, and built a life where every day is mine. If you've ever been erased by the people who should have celebrated you, hit like, subscribe, and comment the word freedom, because sometimes disappearing isn't running away. It's finally showing up for yourself.